Today we're going to be thinking about holistic approaches to ADHD care. My name is Jess Brunet. I'm an advanced nurse practitioner and non-medical prescriber and the UK clinical team manager here at Qbtech. And I'm really grateful to be joined today by Ceri Reed and my colleague Penny Lazell. Ceri, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you. I'm Ceri Reed from Parents' Voices in Wales. We're a social enterprise company that support neurodivergent families across Wales.
Amazing, thank you. And Penny?
Hi Jess, welcome Ceri. I'm Penny Lazell. I'm a clinical advisor at Qbtech and my background is as a general nurse and health visitor and also an ADHD practitioner.
Wonderful. Well, so let's kick things off today, and Ceri, we're really grateful to have your experience here on the couch with us. And I guess starting off, I want to think about what do we mean by holistic approaches to ADHD care. I think often with myself as a non-medical prescriber, I work quite well within the medical model, but actually we know that there's a lot more needs-based work, psychoeducation that we could be doing with those within the diagnosed population of ADHD, but also those on waiting lists and undiagnosed as well. Ceri, do Parents' Voices, do they support with any of this, or do you have any views on the holistic approach?
We currently don't in statutory services have any psychoeducation programmes being rolled out across Wales, but it's been identified as a gap. Mm-hmm. And so the Welsh Government are rolling out something called the Neurodivergence Improvement Programme, which is updating the Autism Code of Practice to the Neurodivergence Code of Practice. It means that we're going upstream to meet the needs of children, young babies, children, young people and adults in Wales. And one of the areas that we know is there's a gap is psychoeducation. Okay. And so we have an arm in Wales from the Welsh Local Government Association called the National Neurodivergence Team, and they will be creating psychoeducation models going forward across the age spectrum that we can utilise for different age groups. But it is a real need, yeah.
And you mentioned there thinking kind of really from early on in development. I think I heard you mention babies right through to young people. And Penny, I guess you with your health visiting background, how early is too early to start thinking about ADHD, the needs of the family, and also is there a level of importance around kind of stabilising the world around the child, and what are your views on that?
In answer to that question, and having a background in health visiting, when I first started health visiting, ADHD wasn't even mentioned sort of 20 years ago. And in fact, the first person to mention or use the word neurodiversity was Judy Singer in 1998. And that's not that long ago. So when we're looking at the sort of when is too early, this is a very new concept. When is too early to actually start thinking about neurodiversity and particularly ADHD? We know that in those early years, a lot of families do struggle. We now know that there's a huge population of adults who have undiagnosed ADHD. What impact does that have on those young children? So yes, we're looking at the nice guidance is diagnosis at the age of 6. What are we doing about that symptomology before the age of 6, and should we be really channeling funding into the early years as well as? Absolutely,
and I think when we talk about nice guidance, we have to be aware that there is no nice guidance for that pre-diagnosis.
No, you're right.
So this is a space that we can be innovative and brave. And it's an opportunity, I think, that when we're identifying those adults with ADHD, we know of the risks of trauma and the impact of mental health on parents and of course adverse childhood experiences. So watchful waiting of those children, I think, is crucial going forward. Whether those adults have had a diagnosis or not, the more people become empowered and informed about ADHD, self-diagnosis, I believe, is valid.
And I think we've reached an age now where neurodiversity, ADHD, autism and other neurodivergence, people are a lot more aware of now with social media and that sort of thing. And we're seeing, or at least I'm seeing in clinic a lot more, that when I'm assessing children and young people for possible ADHD, that the parents are thinking, hold on, like I really resonate with these symptoms as well. And we have kind of adults who have been missed along the way and may have been punishing themselves for symptoms that they didn't recognise, which could lead to other mental health needs. So I think when we're thinking about holistic care, if you were in clinic with that child or young person, I almost find it strange that we don't have family-based clinics.
I absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. And I think in Wales, part of the neurodevelopment, or neurodivergence, I should say, improvement programme, we're going to digitally profile children. Health, they're going to come into communities, into education. When a term that Amanda Kirby, learners of concern, are raised within education, whether the schools see that prevalence or presentation or not, it's elevating the lived experience and expertise of the parents in their children, that we can digitally profile that child to see whether there are characteristics of not just ADHD, but other co-occurring conditions. And what I would love to see is the whole family being profiled.
And when you say digital profiling, what does that entail?
Well, it's looking at where the challenges, it's a bit of a deficit model because you're looking at where the challenges lay in order to diagnose.
Okay.
It's not diagnostic per se, but what it does do, it provides that spiky profile. It gives you a robust, objective screening, if you like, of what the likelihood is of having autism, ADHD, dyslexia, developmental language disorder, etc. And because of the occurrence of genetic prevalence, which we think with ADHD is around 80%, am I correct?
Yeah, you are correct.
That actually, why are we not profiling whole families? Because we know of also the link with substance use disorder. We're looking at the link with employment issues, housing issues, the criminal justice system, because of these adults that haven't been diagnosed. So for me, the gold standard would be whole family support.
Because we don't exist as individuals, we work within a system, whether we're in a family unit or if we're in a workplace unit or even in a friendship group, a relationship. It's not often that you're operating all the time as an individual.
No one's an island.
And
no.
Exactly. And we know, again, with ADHD symptoms and co-occurring needs which come alongside it, that the level of severity and how your symptoms present are very much based around your environment. Are you feeling stressed? Are you feeling anxious? Are reasonable adjustments in place or not? And you mentioned with the digital profiling, Ceri, that at the moment it's taken a bit of a deficit-based model, and we're seeing a bit of a movement, and I think it's about time to move into more neuroaffirmative practice, neuroaffirmative care. But I'm wondering if the education system and actually even workplaces, higher education, are we there yet? And actually it's probably good to unpick what is neuroaffirmative practice and how does that link to holistic care?
Right. Wales is different to England because we have devolved agencies, so health, social care and education are devolved in Wales, and that has allowed us to have legislation for our own nation. And we have something called the ALN reform, which is additional learning needs reform. The basis of that was that it was a shift away from the medical model where you didn't need a diagnosis to get support.
Okay.
So in Wales, it's a needs-led approach. But we're not there yet in understanding what does that look like and how do you identify needs and what, so it's a case of having that legislation, but underneath that is improving the understanding about neurodiversity, co-occurrence of conditions, and the missing middle learners. The learners won't meet that threshold of severity that won't get on the ALN register. Understanding, another analogy, Professor Amanda Kirby's, I'm stealing all her stuff today, is coloured balls in a bucket.
Okay, explain.
Where you might have 1 or 2 balls or traits of one condition, but if you had 6 balls, you'd meet that threshold of severity. And when you look at labels based on severity, you miss the whole person.
Okay.
So what she's trying to say is that if we need to improve our universal provision in schools, so it's neuroaffirming practice, that's a culture shift. That's just not down to the ALNCO. That's not just down to an individual development plan or a diagnosis. That is everybody subscribing to a neuroaffirming practice where everybody has their needs met in education. So we are on that journey in Wales, and we have pockets of really good practice in different areas, but it's about reducing disparity and how do we reach not just education, but the whole system.
And it is interesting that it sounds like Wales is moving slightly further forward, but I've done a lot of EHCP panels in my time, lots of applications for EHCPs, which are education healthcare plans for young people. And again, in theory, that is a needs-based approach, but we all know in practice, unless the diagnosis is there, it's very hard to get the adjustments made for the young person.
It's really hard.
And so I'm really resonating with what you're saying about having a whole cultural shift in that it's about meeting people where they're at.
Yep.
And I guess the neuroaffirmative practice, again, whether it's wherever you are in education or in the workplace, it's around recognising people's strengths and differences and tailoring the workload to that as well, isn't it?
And I think we all recognise that, don't we? We're all working in that field. How do we get our other practitioners, education, in universities, schools as well, how do we empower them, educate them to be thinking the same way that we're doing? Because at the moment, the education isn't there, and as you say, these middle people, these missing children in the middle, who then end up out of education or in the criminal justice system. How can we protect them? How can we focus on that sort of cohort?
I think that comes down to understanding presentation and that shift away from behaviour being that, behaviour is not a diagnosis. And understanding that behaviour is a form of communication.
Absolutely.
And if a child is dysregulated, then we're not meeting needs. And so what are those needs? And thinking about them, well, I think they're interdependent. So I think we tend to think of educational classroom needs, social needs, physical needs and emotional needs. And actually they're interdependent. When you don't provide the support in one area, it impacts another. And so that allows us to see the whole child. And so that is about educating the educators, going into initial teacher training colleges, embedding that understanding of neurodivergence, understanding, so importantly, self-regulation and co-regulation with children, especially thinking about ADHD there, because the DSM-5 doesn't talk about emotional dysregulation, and actually it's one of the core features that most parents find the most challenging. So if, when we talk like maybe at some point about that psychoeducation and what do we need in that, for me, hands down, co-regulation.
Yeah, and I think that's relevant not only to the childhood cohort, either diagnosed or undiagnosed ADHD, but those adults who either haven't had a diagnosis and maybe exploring it, but also those who are diagnosed as well. And you're spot on. I am still surprised that emotional regulation isn't within the DSM-5 criteria, but we know it's so strongly linked to impulsivity, and sometimes words can fall out of our mouths, and you almost you can see people wanting to scoop them back in,
that comes with it.
Absolutely. And then how that then impacts our interpersonal relationships. And actually, I think what you're talking about is taking that biopsychosocial approach. And if you focus too heavily on one domain, you're going to get a shift in that no one is made up of one thing, and you need to take into account the whole person, and then, as we've already said, that person within their system, within their environment as well. But also, and I really liked what you said about not pathologizing behavior. And in my clinical practice, we would always say, what what is the behaviour communicating?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because no child, and even no adult, like we've probably all been in meetings where we've come away going, I really wish I hadn't responded in that way. And in a classroom setting, a child can be dysregulated, and then you step back going, well, no one wants to present like that in front of their peers or colleagues, because you internalise that, don't you? And you think, well, I'm the problem. But actually, what is that behaviour communicating, and what's not being met by either your educational environment, your workplace environment, or your home environment, if not everyone is as understanding of each other's needs?
I think the home and school element, what you've touched on there, is really important.
Yeah, definitely.
Because when a child comes from a home that they understand co-regulation, and they come to a school that thinks that additional learning needs for Wales or SEND in England is just about classroom support, we're missing something really vital about the relational approach.
But if you then move into that full circle of that parent with undiagnosed ADHD and potentially unrecognised ADHD who has lived a life being chastised for their own behaviours, that's then going to obviously impact that child, isn't it?
Oh, I mean, the dysregulation, I think, so the adults that are coming through now have a family history of dysregulation in their home. They may not know that that's not typical, because that's all they've ever known. Yeah. And the lack of patience, the lack of tolerance, not being able to, their window of tolerance being a lot smaller than a neurotypical parent, so them reaching 0 to 100 much quicker and not being as tolerant as they need be for more challenging behaviours. Yeah. When you understand what emotional dysregulation is, why it happens in ADHD, it's so validating. Yeah. And to make sense of your own past and understand your parents and how they were dysregulated, and how you can actually, when we think about trauma cycles and cyclic trauma, actually what are we talking about?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and you're unpicking family scripts as well.
Yeah.
What's the narrative of my family? Oh, we all blow up. We're all just angry.
Absolutely.
Or is it that we haven't learnt to regulate and co-regulate, and at what point do we recognise that?
It's the biggest gift that you can give to families, is for them to understand emotional regulation and co-regulation is the biggest gift that we can give them. And then from that, and using that strength-focused language, making the strengths of the child their main identity to preserve their well-being, but also give them aspirations for the future so they have a purpose and a path. It's the biggest gift.
I think what I'm hearing you say as well is that it's also about everyone having an equal voice. So whether or not you're the child in the dynamic or the adult, how are those needs being heard, and how are those needs being met? The other thing I find interesting is that we kind of consider neurodivergence almost in a bit of a kind of binary isolation, in that, oh, we need to support schools to learn more. The chances are a number of their staff are neurodivergent as well, and how are they being supported within a classroom or a workplace setting? How do their colleagues understand them? How do the children relate to them as well?
I mean, this is a common conversation that we have about workforce wellbeing, workforce sustainability. You would know from coming from health, both come from health, you know that it's an issue.
Yeah.
And maybe we should think about workforce inclusion as a first step to get people walking in the shoes of neurodiverse and neuroaffirming environments, psychologically informed environments. Maybe we should be doing that first, so that we walk in those shoes in order to have the skills to support children.
And I agree. I think this is all very new, really, isn't it, in the whole scheme of things. That medical model has been the basis for ADHD assessment, and it's only just over the sort of past, really sort of just before COVID, post-COVID, that we've been talking in a more holistic way, because we're recognising that the needs are much wider than just getting a diagnosis and giving some medication. There are many more aspects to neurodiversity, and particularly an ADHD diagnosis, whether it's
And Penny and I, we've worked within ADHD services clinically, and we know the pressures that come with working clinically face to face, and we're reflecting on the most recent ADHD task force documentation for England, where currently there are over 500,000 people in England waiting, child and adult, for ADHD assessments, and they're estimating over 2 million are diagnosed or undiagnosed with ADHD in England alone. And it wouldn't be taking into account individual differences and individual needs if you assume that all of those 2.5 million people would benefit from the same thing. And so when I started working in ADHD care like over 10 years ago, we had a wait list of 3 days, and you kind of just saw 7-year-olds at that point. I know. It's not like that anymore. But I think as we've moved on with our understanding, we know that female presentations look different. We know that when you have comorbidity, co-occurring need, which occurs in a minimum of 50% of cases, whether or not it's another aspect of that neurodivergent umbrella, so you're thinking autism, developmental coordination disorders, the specific learning differences such as dyslexia, dysgraphia, but also mental health, depression, anxiety, eating disorders. ADHD doesn't look the same in each of these settings, and what people need in order to feel well and reach their potential is going to be really different, and it needs to be individualized, but also come from the voice of the individual to feel strong enough and empowered enough to say, I understand that this is the menu that's on offer. This is what I feel like would work for me based on what I know about myself. And empowering children and adults to have that conversation.
So in Wales we are on that path. So in Wales we've co-produced, Parents' Voices co-produced with the T4CYP team.
Can you just explain what the TY?
Oh, so Time for Children and Young People was a programme that was looking at improving access to CAMHS, because obviously there was that kind of threshold in order you had to be severe enough to get into CAMHS, and improving access to CAMHS. So part of the whole school approach, linking over with that CAMHS in-reach teams going into the community and providing that support, raises the question, I'm probably going to go at a tangent now, sorry, raising a question of, well, is that support relational? Is it neuroaffirming? Or is it just ELSA and one size CBT, right? So then there's a question mark, you can cut all this out. So the NEST framework is a whole system framework, and it's an acronym for Nurturing, Empowering, Safe and Trusted. It's a relation-based, partnership-based framework, which is not just partnerships between services and schools, but the relationships, safe relationships between services and families. And that, it has 6 core principles, and one of those core principles is the co-production.
I thought we would come to that.
So we undertake co-production in a few of the health boards in the neurodevelopmental services in Wales, and we facilitate that. We bring parents to the table, we mediate in those settings.
If you break that down, what is co-production in, like, if you were to paint a picture of what that looks like?
Oh, it's funny because in true co-production, the services are redundant in the meeting.
Okay.
They need to come out of the driving seat to get into the passenger seat and allow us to lead and say, this is what we want, this is what needs to change. That's really hard, and it takes a brave health service to allow us to do that. But it can happen based on true relationships and safe relationships. So that is my job, is to build those relationships with health, to build the relationships with the families and bring them together and make it a cohesive process. And, also being transparent and honest about, is this a participation or is it co-production? And sometimes we throw away words of, this was a co-produced. Well, actually, no, it wasn't. It was a consultation, or it was a participation, or it was co-designed. It's really understanding what co-production really is. And it's not easy for services, but when we get it right, and we've been getting it right in Gwent, and we're getting it right in Powys, when we get it right, it's wonderful, because we meet the needs of people who are going to come through that pathway. And you have to have new parents all the time coming through to evaluate what you've developed, so that we can see whether it's working well or not. And it's a continual rolling
And it sounds
process.
like a real sort of new age way of working. I think historically we work very traditionally. People don't like change. They like to work in their same sort of little lines and do what they've always done. But it sounds to me as if the co-production type of working actually facilitates change. And
It does.
change.
And because they're so focused on data and waiting times and formulations and budgets, it's an hour of their time a month. And the qualitative benefit is huge. You know, we have to move away from focusing on the quantitative.
And I think this is it, isn't it? We all recognise that there's a need for change because of these really long waiting lists, people identifying themselves with ADHD. A lot of, we've heard from Jess that there's, 500,000 people on those waiting lists, and there's other people who are self-diagnosing. Then a change needs to happen. So it's sort of recognising that, we can do this and getting the people on board.
It does take, I think it takes a certain person, and that's obviously you, Ceri, in Wales. But if someone came to you and said, Ceri, look, I really want to get this started in my area. I've got no idea where I start. What does co-production mean when I'm getting going? How do I build these relationships? Is there a framework for that, or how do people even get started? Yeah, because it feels like a minefield, doesn't it?
It is. I think it's kind of multi-layered, really. And first of all, I would introduce them to the Co-Pro Network Wales, which is a wonderful organisation, third sector organisation, that frames a lot of co-production training across Wales for services. Also, there's the public participation standards, which we refer people to, as to the values-led approach and the standards within co-production. I would also signpost them to, so this is what I kind of do in the beginning, is signpost people to, this is what you need to look at, this is what we need to read and understand before we're on that journey. Yeah. And also look at the NEST core principles, which is looking at access to expertise is one of the core principles, trusted adults, co-production, and thinking about that values-led approach and inclusivity. Also, that co-production is only as good as the diversity of the group. And if you've got a group of white females, then you're going to do a great job for white females. Yeah. So how are we going to reach those groups? Because we do a lot of it online. So then you're thinking, well, there's digital poverty. So we're not wholly there. No. And we forgive ourselves for that because we're on a journey.
Yeah, and I think it's that recognition. Like I said previously, this is fairly new to a lot of people. With the growth of recognition of ADHD and neurodiversity has been huge. So we can't expect everything, that sort of holistic approach, to be fixed and everyone.
I think the intersectionality side is something that we're still developing and working on. And Wales is a small nation, and it's, as you say, we're trying to build relationships with the minority groups. I may not be the right person to do that, so I need to find that person who's that community leader.
So building those networks.
You're building, and that would be one of our strengths of Parents' Voices, is that we've got our fingers all over Wales, trying to build that web of diversity.
Yeah, that just sounds, really,
and it sounds like everything that underpins that, and actually what we've talked about today is about layers of trust, and it's whether or not you've got trust within the school or the workplace environment, but equally it's around trust between services, building relationships, and it sounds like being ready and open to change as well. I think the other element of that that's really interesting is, at the moment we are in a model where if you want an assessment for ADHD within England or Wales or around the UK, you go to an ADHD service. That might be embedded within CAMHS or paediatrics, it might be in adult mental health, or it might be a separate service, or you may go private. But at the moment, it's encapsulated in its own world a lot of the time, isn't it? Whereas actually what we're needing is a wider kind of thinking around this, around comorbidities, and like what we mentioned before, how do you understand how that person's ADHD symptoms are going to present when it's co-occurring with an eating disorder or disordered eating, such as ARFIDs. You've got low mood, you've got anxiety, maybe schizophrenia, and it's when coming back to holistic care, it's, I think, acknowledging that if you are looking at ADHD on its own, you need to question yourself, what have you missed?
Oh, absolutely. That. And I think that every agency is a gateway. And in Wales, part of the NEST framework is that single point of access, where you have one pathway that gets people where they need to be. So I think that we need to be looking at housing, the criminal justice system, substance use services, and saying the cohorts that are coming through our doors, we're going to have a higher incidence of ADHD than you are in the general population. And therefore, let's start screening and let's get these people on that pathway. That, for me, would be the gold standard.
And I think as we're moving, you've touched on kind of access to digital tools, and that is something that we need to keep in mind. But do the two of you see digitising the tools that we use? We've already kind of moved post-pandemic to using things like Teams and Zoom a lot more. Do you think there's a role for greater reach and greater understanding through using technology within this? Penny, you might.
I think there has to be, isn't there? I mean, that's the way the world's evolving. We've got the influx of AI. There's got to be some digitalisation to the way we're sort of assessing our neurodiverse population and recognising them.
Yeah, and even on wait lists, I think as well, we know that there are long waits for assessment at the moment, and having those interventions earlier, whether it's from Tier 2 services that are supporting alongside the main assessment service, or improving digital access to validated tools that you can use in healthcare, feels like if that is something that would work for you, it's another thing to add to the tool belt, as it were, isn't it?
We need a menu, don't we?
Absolutely.
So that, as you said, people can choose what's right for them. And that might be digital, but it might also be peer mentoring in the community, which is something that we sponsor parent groups in Wales, ADHD groups, to support ADHD adults. So you need to have a range of tools, don't you?
It's a big toolbox.
Absolutely that. But also, how do we make sure that we don't have conflict in the information that's being shared? And so this is where the National Neurodivergence team in Wales will be really helpful, because we'll have one platform that we'll be able to signpost, but we know that anywhere that we signpost from there, it'll be validated, and you know that the information and the support will be safe.
And consistent by the sounds of it as well. And I think that's the message that we're all kind of working towards, is that we want kind of safe, effective, but consistent support across the UK, so that people know what to expect from what they're accessing, and, like you say, can then identify in advance. It's not a mystery what is going to be working well.
And we have to have this consistency because of the long waiting list. There are going to be many people that never get access to an ADHD assessment. So there has to be that information, that toolkit out there for those people who have self-diagnosed or recognised that symptomology. And it probably just isn't ADHD, is it? It's going to be, as we've talked about, lots of other co-occurring conditions that may be involved as well. But to be able to access something, a consistent and safe toolkit.
And I think for me, it means that we keep research in the centre of everything that we do, that we are informed and it's up to date, because the research base is growing so quickly. And in Wales, we have the Wilson Centre, which is headed up by Professor Anita Thapar, who was chair of the task force for, in England for ADHD. And the one thing we're working with Anita on is a digital platform, which is co-producing, what does that look like with families, of resources. And that might look like psychoeducation modules that they'll be able to access. And this will go on for a number of years.
Yeah.
What we're hoping is that Welsh Government will adopt that as a long-term accessible tool for services,
but even
for
things
schools.
like diet and exercise and sleep and those things that, you know, are simple, but the impact of those on neurodiversity. So if you're not getting sleep, if you're not taking exercise, if you're haven't got a good diet, that's all going to...
It's huge.
Yeah, exactly. So,
and most importantly, it's taking that research and all that information into a way that's digestible for someone who isn't clinical or is maybe feeling very overwhelmed with their situation or their family situation, and being able to have practical steps which are accessible and they're likely to be able to try in their home environment to then improve their well-being, improve their world.
and that's empowering, isn't it?
Absolutely.
For parents, adult and or their children. Because at the moment I feel if there isn't that access to that more holistic approach, people don't know what to do, and that makes them
or where to go to find it.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's absolutely that, and just being transparent and accessible.
I'm going to take that moment and thank you both, and I think we're going to wrap it up there. But what I'm hearing from our discussion today is that holistic care in ADHD is almost everyone's business. It's around empowerment, it's around trust, it's co-production, and it's a vulnerability from both services and those utilising services to say, this is what we need. Yeah.
Nothing
And
about
we need
us without
more
us.
voices
So I think
like yourself.
co-production is the way forward.
Yeah.
Completely
And
agree.
we need more voices like yourself.
Thank you.
Yeah, championing the voice of ADHD.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So that's been season 3, episode 4 of Rethinking ADHD here at Qbtech. Thank you today to Penny and to Ceri. We hope you've enjoyed it.